what is the axis of selfishness and altruism?
Hmm.
How does a character move across that axis? What will change that person? The other thing about me is I'm like relentlessly obsessive and determined, and I'm the clown that you punch and it's filled with sand, and when it goes back, it keeps coming back. So when I get rejections on all my short stories or whatever, I was like, fine, 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 fine.
All right, so I'm going to do my little intro, and then we'll chat because we're already chatting. All right.
Okay.
Greetings, Skullgateers. I'm Chris Vandyke, president of Skullgate Media and editor-in-chief of our flagship anthology series, Tales from the Year Between. Welcome to Coffee at the Skullgate, an interview series where I sit down and talk with one of the writers whose work has appeared in our books. Today, I'm talking to ER Hoffer, Erin, who is one of the writers who helped me create our first anthology, Achten Tan, Land of Dust and Bone, where you can find her fabulous story, Harmonies of the Dead. She's also been one of the kindest and most supportive people as I've worked on Skullgate to get it off the ground, so I'm thrilled to have a chance to sit down and talk with her today and get to know her a little better. So Erin, thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you. It's great to talk with you. I really appreciate all the work you've done on these anthologies. It's amazing.
Thanks. So first, just take a moment, introduce yourself, whatever you want to say about you, who you are, either with writing, outside of writing, just who is Aaron Hoffer?
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess in my day job, I'm a policy researcher and an academic. So I teach at an online university and mostly students in public administration and business. So I'm really interested in kind of how government works to help people. And primarily, I'm focused on the environment and climate policy, but I'm working on things like COVID policy as well because it's all connected.
Right.
I have a checkered past, I guess. I used to be an architect, the old-fashioned kind. And when I graduated, there were no jobs, so I ended up going into special effects industry, and I locked into that for a little while. So I worked on a movie that is kind of an oldie now. I hate to admit it, but it's The Last Starfighter. So
Oh, yeah.
that's one of the interesting things. I now told you the most interesting thing about me. Darn it.
Okay. Well, I still remember checking that out on VHS from like the local video store in my town. So I know The Last Starfighter. I'm not sure how many younger people have heard of it. It hasn't sort of got canonical in the way that some of those sci-fi movies from that era did, but I think that's sort of a deep cut. But that's cool. Just how did you make the move from architect to special effects? Was it just there was a job and you applied for it, or was there any connection there?
Well, it was because in the early days of special effects, which is pre-PC, it's kind of hard
Right.
to believe. We did it on a Cray supercomputer.
Oh
It
wow.
was a weird, unusual company started by a guy. It's a long story, but they needed people who knew how to draft because the way we encoded the spaceships was by putting them on a full-size drafting board and like picking the dots in
So you're
3D.
doing like digitizing with like the old draft because yeah, my dad was an engineer, so he had CAD programs back in the '80s, and I remember he taught. I did drafting with him and using the little digitizer, clicking on a grid,
That,
the
that's
little
it.
mouse that looked like a calculator with a little bullseye on it. Yeah, that was.
Yes. So they hired a bunch of architects to like make the spaceships that they could fly around.
That's cool. That's neat. It's funny. I think of actually in one of my books, I said it in the '90s, and I wanted they had to use supercomputers, and so I spent a while researching what was like the top of the line if I wanted a government agency to have the most computing power possible. What in 1996 or '85 would have been pushing the limits. So that was, and of course, it was not very much.
You probably read about the Craven.
Yeah, no, Cray. I remember the name. I mean, when I remember as a kid, like Cray was like like if you wanted to name fancy computer, it was a Cray supercomputer.
Yeah.
And then
I
today,
got to
obviously,
turn it on once.
yeah, probably
So excited.
my iPhone probably has more computing power than a Cray supercomputer. So, all right. So you became you were studied to be an architect, did some special effects. Now you're in academics doing public policy. And you mentioned the environment. So we'll get back to that because I know you also like to write about that.
Mhm.
So in fact, that might be before we get to the stuff you did with Achten Tan outside of Skullgate work. What sort of writing have you done? And you mentioned climate. I know you do climate fiction. Do you want to talk a little about that?
Sure. So it's interesting because I, like many writers they talk to, have written since they were little kids, and I really admire that. I'm not one of those people. What happened to me was in 2016, I had been thinking about a lot of ideas related to climate. And I was thinking, could fiction influence people? Because in that time, it wasn't really as much on the radar as it is even now. And so I had an idea about a novel. So I just said, I don't know how to do that. And I just self taught, I just absorbed podcasts and everything I could find out there. And there's a lot. And I did NaNoWriMo several years just to try to like work on it. And that was my objective was what are the issues that are, that can change people's minds and can a work of fiction achieve that?
Cool.
Been doing that ever since.
Um, were there any, I guess, other climate fiction books that influenced you when you started thinking about that? Because I know recently, sort of cli-fi and like solar punk have become, buzzwords. I think because we all realize that if we don't change what we're doing to the environment, that dystopic future is going to be showing up very, very soon. But obviously, those books have gone back for a while. Are there some that I guess influenced you when you started thinking, or that you looked for?
Well, it's a great question, and I just if you look at a list like on Goodreads, you'll see almost 300 titles. And some of the people go back to Jules Verne.
Right,
There's a book that he wrote in the around 1890 that was about the poles, magnetic pole switching. So there's a really long history of books about the environment and then characters responding to
mhm,
hostile environments. I mean, there's some that are a lot of them are dystopias.
right,
And I guess that's so I guess I picked out a few names like I like the arrange like Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower,
right.
King Solver, Flight Behavior. There's some newer ones. Bradley has Clade, McConaughey Migrations. There's a lot of new ones. Roan Horse, Trail of Lightning. There's a wide range, a diverse set of authors. So it's a really rich um, canon, I guess you could
Mhm.
say. And there are many titles you can think of that might not even be on, you know, um, Margaret Atwood or Ursula Le Guin
Yeah.
is a very common. She has many titles in this category. So what I found that there were so many that were really dystopian, and the characters had to like find inner strength and deal with it, like the Cormac McCarthy's The Road and so on. And I felt like that is very important work, but I wanted to see if you could do something different. The idea is, can you look at some of the other issues and, maybe have a utopia? So I started looking at utopia work, even nonfiction work about real utopias that we
Mhm.
had in the United States. And that I think is a really interesting idea. Of course, utopias are never perfect for everybody. And so it gives you a lot to work with the characters and, trying to respond. Oh, the other one was Nathaniel Rich's Day, Odds Against Tomorrow, which I thought was really interesting about New York. I don't know if you read that one.
Yeah, because it's interesting because obviously, like the value of a dystopia can be to sort of warn you, like if we keep going down this path. But then the danger is so often it can sort of lead to despair. Like if you're looking, this is our future, and I think we so often feel that with our climate change now. Like you're looking at it, say, is you read articles like it's too late or we're not going to do anything. Is 2030, if we the new Biden, climate accords, is 2030 too late to do anything? It can very obviously like lead to just lack of action. So I like this idea of sort of hope. Like there's sort of a warning, but there's also this is what we could do
Yeah.
if
And I
we.
guess the thing that got me very interested, there's a lot of focus on world building and,
Mhm.
in any kind of sci fi, but fantasy and especially in climate oriented fiction. But what I think is interesting is the behavior of the characters, because that's what I study in policy research is behavioral change. So I think the question is, what is the axis of selfishness and altruism?
Mhm.
How does a character move across that axis? What will change that person to think about themselves as part of a bigger community, or owing something to others? So that I thought, that's an issue you could dig into in many different kinds of
Right.
worlds. I mean,
Remember,
environmental justice is a really important topic nowadays. So I kind of feel like there's a lot we could dig into there that's even on the nonfiction side. So
right.
Michael Mann is a scientist who has a new book out that's fantastic. Naomi Klein, some of the people who write about policy. I heard a panel with Leah Stokes, and she's got a couple of new titles out. So I really recommend people, who care about this, check that out because it's not too late, and we need to do something now.
Right. 'Cause I remember I read an article recently. It was with COVID, but they were talking about how one of the problems is so much of the public conversation is just from doctors, and they're saying like doctors know the science, but you need to be talking to the public, like the sociologists, because what matters isn't, basically what's right or wrong. It's what people will do. And you can have all the best science and best policies in place, but if people aren't going to follow them, it's completely moot. So I like the idea of what does it, how do you talk to people again about that altruism and selfishness? Because ultimately, society has to be about giving up some of your own personal interest, because within your lifetime, the best thing you can do is be selfish. That there's no benefit to me to have the solar panels that I have on my roof now. Really, like it's going to save me money in 20 years, but in the short term, the main benefit is going to be 20, 30, 60, 100, 200 years in the future. So yeah, how do you talk to people or talk to a society in a way that has that long-term, bigger than yourself
Hmm.
thought?
7 generations.
Yeah. Um, also interesting. I know that in fantasy, there's this sort of this interesting thread of the fantasy post-apocalypse that you get, and I wonder how that might feed into. I mean, I hadn't thought of that until we were just talking, but like you have that sort of world where you have the fantasy world like Shannara, and at some point you realize that there used to be a technological past that they had, and they've sort of built a utopia after a dystopia. Jack Vance's Dying Earth, which is obviously the dystopia side, but you have the sort of medieval society growing out of what used to be probably our future.
Mm.
That wasn't a question. That was just
I'll check it out. I'll check it out. I love references. That'd be great.
All right, so a little about Achten Tan. Obviously, I got to know you almost exactly a year ago. I know one of the authors found my original tweet and shared it again yesterday. I guess I sent it on April 27th last year, so that we're almost coming up to the Achten Tan anniversary.
Happy
But so
anniversary.
I know I sent out the initial tweet because I was bored. I was doing another anthology, and I decided I'd love to do this thing, and I have nothing else to do because I'm stuck at home with COVID. But I'm always interested. What made you see a random tweet by a stranger and decide that you wanted to join my weird little project?
Well, yeah, and I remember that really well because I'm a very avid Twitter follower, and I follow a lot of other writers. It's just a great place, I think, to connect with the writing community and agents. I was querying, I was trying to really learn about the field because I didn't know very much about it. And when I saw your tweet, I'm not even sure how I ended up following you. I guess I must have, seen you, referred by others or whatever. I think I was following you already. I thought, wow, it would be so great to work with other writers, and it sounded like a really fun project, and I just am kind of hungry for learning, and I feel like I love collaborating
Hmm.
is the other thing. And it sounded, so I like immediately responded, and doggone it, I was too late. I was so crushed. I was like, oh no, he has enough people, like within minutes. I'm too slow on the draw. And you said, well, you'd put me on a waiting list. And I'm like, the other thing about me is I'm like relentlessly obsessive and determined. And I'm the clown that you punch and it's filled with sand. And when it goes back, it keeps coming back. So when I get rejections on all my short stories or whatever, I was like, fine, 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 fine. I just don't give up. So I think you probably just got sick of me just saying, fine, fine. I'll put my name on the list. Fine. I'm on the Google Doc, whatever you need, whatever you need. And somehow I like lucked into it.
Well, I'm glad. So I know our anthology is a little unique because the first thing we do is we do shared world building rather than just writing your own story. Can you tell me a little about how you approached creating a world like with other people, what that experience was like, and what led you to tell the ultimate story that you told in Harmonies of the Dead?
Well, that for me was a really exciting aspect because I have a gamer personality and I love games and I play a lot of games with the family. But I'm not a person with a history of role playing games. Like I don't know, I never played D&D, and I kind of like was the wrong generation. But my kids are so into it, like 1,000%. So I felt like I got a little um, sense of what was going on. So when you said you were going to use this game, I was just thrilled. And I thought the process. I'm very interested in process was so interesting because as a design process, the fact that you engaged, it was really brilliant, I think. Engage people with this scenario, but there was structure around it,
Mhm.
like you knew you were going to come up at a certain time. So we were all like pinned to our PCs or phones waiting for our turn, and thinking about things. But it was also like improv. So I love the fact that you can't just like have your pre-written thing and then say this is going to be in the world,
Right.
but you have to riff off what other people have said. So it was like, oh my God, I've got to read all these things, think about the characters. And really did a trip in my head, which I thought was great. And even just starting out by identifying materials and then voting on them. So, the shared world had these, like five or whatever it was, principles and places, and that we were at a starting point. I thought that was really phenomenal. So when my turn came up, I threw in things. I don't even remember what I threw in, but I think there was a riff about some characters that have gone off to explore something mysterious,
Hmm.
and then they came back, and that was my turn, and I was like, what would happen when they came back? And I started to think about back to this climate fiction, because I always have my hidden agenda,
Right.
which is, what is the behavioral, how can I connect it? So here were these characters that had come back and something had happened, and I had a chance to write a little couple lines about that, and I felt like, oh, it reminds me of the issue in behavior about the connection, because we're talked about, I'm willing to sacrifice my needs for a community in the short time that I'm alive. And why is that? It's because I'm connected to people in a certain way. So it was a little bit of an echo of what you were doing, connecting us, actually. We're sacrificing our ideas to connect to the ideas of others in the game itself. And so I thought, well, people have died, and there's some connection that they've perceived, the adventurers who return. So I thought, oh, I'll just throw that in. And then the story went on from there in all kinds of crazy directions. But I was just still intrigued by that idea. So when I
Mhm.
did my story, I just wanted to explore that.
So, other than reading, where do you draw inspiration from? I think obviously it sounds like from your work and policy, but are there, I guess, certain places where if you're, I don't know if you're ever like out of ideas and you need to go to sort of refill your creative well, or how do you, where do you go for inspiration? I don't want it to be that terrible question people ask creative people, which is where do you get your ideas, because that's just horrible. But where do you draw inspiration from, perhaps?
Yeah, I guess it is probably from the real world. Like that, it is a hard question, because I think, and I don't know if this happens to you, but if you have an assignment, for example, right now there's an anthology, or we have the world that we built, and you have your assignment for Achten Tan or whatever, and it's like this empty box, right? And you have a few things, like a few marbles that have been thrown into that box, like, I want to deal with this one issue, right? So I guess the thing that I think about first is, what do I see around me? And I do feel like you are driven by some kind of inner compass. So when you start seeing things in the newspaper or whatever, reading on Twitter, things are going to spark for you, because inside your mind and your heart are working on those things. There's a kind of unknown connection. So then I started to, so in general, I'll probably think first about a character, because I think that is what engages people when they
Mhm.
read stories. So it's like, what kind of character, how would a character feel about that? What kind of character would I want to get to know that's interesting, that's dealing with that
Right.
question or that issue or flaw, whatever it is related to the environment that they sit in. So for that story, I said, okay, I would like to. We did have a few characters to find, I think, and I like a certain type of character, so I'd like to pick on someone and kind of explore what's going on with them. And it kind of came from there, but then it went in very unexpected directions. So I guess it's a good question. It's like, why did I even think that would happen?
Yeah.
Sometimes you look back and you're like, oh yeah. I sent the story to my family members, and some of them were like, yeah, I don't really understand it, but thanks. Because then I don't know where it came from either. Like,
I think many of
anyway,
us
but I
writers
want
are
to,
used to that from our non-writing family members. my mom's
yeah.
my mom's just finishing Achten Tan now. She's like, it took me a very long time to get into it because it's not like what I normally read. But
I love that.
yeah,
But it is important, I think, for people not to just pick the story of the person they know, because I think there is so much context where
yeah.
people have said, "Oh, I went back and read the beginning, and now I get, what's going on," and because it does have coherence and it's logical.
Talking about character there too, because I think often with books like climate fiction or books where both the setting and sort of the theme are very important, right? It's really important whose point of view, who's that person that's getting us that personal experience of the world. Um, so it isn't just sort of a tour guide to um, this
Yeah,
place, which also can be interesting. I love like sort of metafiction that way, but like if you're telling a real story, right, the character, the voice that's guiding you through the world and learning those
yeah.
lessons is super important.
I just want to add one thing, because the
Yeah.
other inspiration are other writers. not so much to copy what they're doing, but just to be aware of the technique. Like this can be a published writer. I took this workshop, as I was mentioning, where we read from a range of genres. And I really wanted to take the workshop to get better at critique, which is essentially read a story, provide feedback, and then we submitted our own stories and provided feedback to one another. And it was really inspiring because I could see things that they other people were doing that had never occurred to me. And also, I read a genre that to me was completely foreign, which is horror.
Mhm.
And so we read, started out reading a bunch of horror stories because the teacher of this is a person named Richard Thomas, who was an editor and a writer. You know, he has lots of publications, and he is kind of an expert at horror. And I thought, oh, I won't like that. And it turned out to be so amazing because I didn't know anything about it. Like I realized I didn't like it without really understanding it.
Right.
So I actually was really inspired by what people are doing there because it's not just about scaring people, but it's about a fundamental kind of human thing that what when people face, awful things in the world. And guess what? Climate fiction is exactly that.
Right. Yeah. And I find that in my experience, usually there's very few, it's true like music, art, writing, there's very few genres in general that I truly just don't like across the board. They might not be my favorite, but there's always someone doing something in that area that, I can, that can connect to me, and usually really good, whoever, whether it's a writer, an artist, and they're connecting to something that's sort of universally human. And so there's always going to be someone doing that sort of story or making that sort of music, whether it's country, hip hop, whether it's horror, whether it's romance, that it's like, yeah, I can actually, as a reader or as a listener, appreciate that, even if it's not my normal sort of go-to comfort area. All right, lightning round, short answers, 1 or 2 words, and no long explanations. What is your favorite book? First thing that comes to mind.
Can anyone answer that question? I'm sorry. Can we get back to that?
All right, defeating the purpose of the lightning round, but okay. Favorite band?
David Byrne.
Okay, nice. What was your favorite book to read to your kids when they were little?
Oh wow, the Stinky Cheese Man was popular.
I love the Stinky Cheese Man. I remember that book. Favorite dish when you order takeout?
Ah, mm, duck.
What type or what style?
Confit.
Okay. Marvel or DC?
I'd probably go Marvel.
Okay. Waffles or pancakes?
Waffles.
Whiskey, beer, or wine?
Wine.
Wine. All right. Do aliens exist?
Of course.
Okay. And will humanity last 100 years from a climate fiction person?
I think humanity will not be what it is today.
Okay. So we will exist, but not in the not in the way we see it now.
Because I'm writing a story right now about Morlocks.
Okay. As I was thinking when you said Jules Verne, that was my first thought was Morlocks. All right. So I also like one of my favorite things on podcasts is when people have like endorsements or recommendations. What's making you happy this week? What's something you've watched, listened to, or done that you could recommend to other like-minded people that might make them happy as well?
Okay, well, I just got this. I'm super excited about this. It's called you can't read it.
I
Anyway.
can't read it from that. What is it?
Yeah, the Story Engine. And it was a Kickstarter that I got an ad for and I decided to go for it. And it's basically a deck of cards that the creator has developed to help you develop prompts, which you can
Okay.
use for your D&D, your role-playing games, or your fiction. And there are also some kind of layers like expansion decks to have sci-fi or fantasy or eldritch horror, whatever. And it's really helping me because you can pull out a character. It gives you a chance to make a selection. Anyway, there's original art on it, so you could say, oh, it's a technician who wants to save their community, but and anyway,
Right.
it
Right. Yeah.
really helps kind of juice your wheels. I think is the
Sure.
way I think of it.
Yeah. I love this sort of thing. Okay. A prompt. And what was it called again?
The Story Engine.
Story.
Very excited about the Biden um, infrastructure plan because climate is one of the 4 pillars.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very excited about that. And a new version of a song where we've rewritten the lyrics of the song, the J.J. Cale song "Cocaine," and the new title is Vaccine. So
Okay.
that'll be out soon.
Okay. Yeah, send me the link to that when we can listen to that. Um, all right.
Uh,
That's it for now. For links to Erin's website and social media accounts, see the show notes below. You can find Erin's story, Harmonies of the Dead in Achten Tan, Land of Dust and Bone, which is on sale now. You can buy it and all of Skullgate's other books directly from us at skullgatemedia.com, as well as at Smashwords, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or support your local bookstore and ask them to order our books for you. You can read all about our publishing collective and future projects at skullgatemedia.com as well. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and our podcast of the same name, Sounds from the Year Between, and wherever you find your audio addictions. Don't miss our updates and content. Sign up for our newsletter or follow us on Twitter at Skullgate Media, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. All right, thanks, Erin, for coming by.
okay, have a good weekend.